The conference room on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows, and I remember thinking, as my husband's lawyer spread those documents across the table, that the city looked beautiful from up there. Funny what your mind does when everything is about to fall apart. My husband sat across from me with his arms crossed, and that particular smile he'd been wearing for the past 8 months, the one that said he already knew how this ended. His mother sat beside him in her cream blazer, pearl earrings, the whole performance. She didn't even look at me. She hadn't looked at me directly since the day I filed. Alara, his lawyer began, and I remember the sound of my own name feeling foreign, almost clinical in that room. The terms are straightforward. You sign the dissolution agreement, you walk away from Holloway Tech with the settlement we discussed, and this is over by Friday. The settlement they discussed. $40,000 and a non-disclosure agreement for a company I had spent 4 years building from a spreadsheet and 2 maxed-out credit cards in a studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and ambition. My husband uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. You're not a founder, Alara. You were a spouse who helped out. There's a difference. His mother finally looked at me then, just to see if it landed. It landed. Of course it landed. 6 years of marriage and he still knew exactly where to press. I picked up my pen, I looked at the documents, and then I set the pen back down. I need to use the restroom, I said. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning was not the conference room, and it was not the separation, and it was not even the night I found the messages on his phone. The beginning was a Tuesday afternoon 7 years ago, when I was 26 years old and sitting in a hospital parking garage, eating a sandwich because I had forgotten to eat lunch, and it was already 4 in the afternoon, and I was the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I was working 60-hour weeks at a mid-sized software firm, managing a product I hadn't designed and didn't believe in, and I had this idea, this one stubborn, inconvenient idea about accessibility software for small medical practices. Not hospitals, not the big systems with their million-dollar budgets, the small practices. The 2 doctor offices in towns where nobody else was looking. I had watched my mother navigate paperwork after her diagnosis the year before, watched her sit at the kitchen table with reading glasses and a magnifying glass, and still not understand what she was signing, and I thought, there has to be a better way to do this. I started building it at night, weekends, that studio apartment, a whiteboard I'd propped against the closet door, 3 different browser tabs of documentation always open. I was not a natural entrepreneur. I was terrified of pitching, terrified of failing publicly, terrified of the moment someone would look at what I'd built and say, this is nothing. I met my husband at a networking event I almost didn't attend. He was charming in that easy, expensive way, the kind of charming that reads as confidence until you live with it long enough to see it's actually something else. He believed in the idea. He said the right things. He had connections I didn't have and a family name that opened rooms I couldn't have found on my own, and when he said, let's build this together, I thought I had found a partner. His mother welcomed me into the family with the warmth of someone performing warmth. She called me resourceful. She said it like a compliment. It took me 2 years to hear it for what it was. We got married. We incorporated. We divided the equity 60-40 his favor, because he argued he was taking on more financial risk, and I was young enough and in love enough and insecure enough to agree. I told myself it didn't matter. We were a team. What was his was mine. We were not a team. I can say that clearly now. I could not say it clearly then, because when you are inside something, when you have bet your career and your identity and your sense of self on something, you find ways to not see what you don't want to see. I told myself his dismissiveness in meetings was just his communication style. I told myself the way he talked over me in front of investors was a nervous habit. I told myself that the messages I found on his phone on a Wednesday night in October were a misunderstanding, and then I sat with that lie for about 45 seconds before I understood that I had run out of ways to not see. The separation was quiet at first. He moved to the guest room. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, going to work, coming home, not eating much. His mother called twice, Both times, she found a way within 3 sentences to remind me that Holloway Tech had been in her son's vision long before I arrived. That was when I understood what the next chapter was going to look like. I had a lawyer. Her name was Dex, short for something, she never said what, and she had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed the part of her job that other people found unpleasant. She wore no-nonsense blazers and had a habit of tapping her pen twice on her legal pad before she said something important. "He's going to argue you were an employee, not a co-founder," she said at our first meeting, before I'd even finished explaining the situation. "The 60-40 split helps him. He'll use it to say you were a minority stakeholder in his venture, not an equal architect of it." "I built the core product," I said. "The accessibility interface, the intake system, the patient-facing modules." Tap tap. "Can you prove that?" I could prove it. I had everything: version histories, commit logs, emails where I was the one solving problems he didn't understand, pitch decks with my fingerprints all over every slide. I had the original business plan in a Google Doc I'd created at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before I'd even mentioned the idea to him. I had the email thread from a practice in rural Ohio that had become our first paying client because I had driven there on a Saturday and done the onboarding myself. I had something else too, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. Dex laid out our options. We could fight the dissolution terms in court, which would be long and expensive and public. We could negotiate, which gave him leverage. Or, and here she paused, tapped twice, we could play the board meeting. Holloway Tech had grown in the past 2 years. We had outside investors now, a 6-member board. My husband controlled 3 seats through his family's holding company. I controlled 1 as a co-founder. 2 seats were independent. "He needs a board majority to restructure your equity out of the company," Dex said. "He can't just take it, he needs the votes." "He'll get them," I said. "His family controls the holding company, 2 family votes, plus his own seat." "Unless the holding company changes its position." I looked at her. Tap tap. "His family's holding company has been in some difficulty. 3 of their portfolio companies lost value in the last 18 months. They've been quietly looking for a capital injection." She pushed a folder across the desk to me. "As of 6 weeks ago, they accepted a minority investment from a fund called Clearwater Advisory Group." I opened the folder. "Clearwater is small," Dex said, "boutique, very discreet. But they have voting influence now in the holding company, which means they have indirect influence in Holloway Tech." I looked at the name at the top of the page, the managing partner of Clearwater Advisory Group. It was my name. I should explain. After I found the messages on his phone, I did not cry for very long. I am the kind of person who, when the ground falls out from under me, goes very still and very quiet and starts making lists. I make lists the way other people make noise. It's just where I go. I had spent 4 years watching my husband's family move money. I had sat in enough rooms, attended enough dinners, listened to enough conversations I was not meant to remember. I understood how their structures worked. I understood that the holding company was the lever. I had savings, not much. We had poured everything into the company for years, but enough. I had a contact from my software days who had since moved into fund management, a woman named Petra. And yes, I know that name is used elsewhere, but I mean a real one, a former colleague, who listened to my situation over coffee and said, "You want to buy influence in his own family's investment vehicle without him knowing it's you." "Yes," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "That's actually not as complicated as it sounds." It took 4 months. The Clearwater Advisory Group was structured to be legally clean, but not obviously traceable to me. I was not hiding anything illegal. Every document was legitimate. Every disclosure was filed. I was simply building, quietly and carefully, a position from which I could not be moved. He had no idea. His family had no idea. They saw a small boutique fund with a decent track record and a capital check that helped stabilize their portfolio, and they said yes, and they did not look closely enough at the name on the management agreement. That was their mistake. I had always been the one who read the fine print. The morning of the board meeting, I wore a gray dress I'd bought specifically for that day. Not flashy, not aggressive. The kind of dress that says, I have been in this room before and I will be in rooms like it long after you have left. My husband arrived with his lawyer and his mother, which meant he'd expected this to be simple. You don't bring your mother to a board meeting unless you think it's a formality. The two independent board members were already seated. They knew something was unusual. Dex had given them enough context without specifics to know to listen carefully. My husband looked at me across the conference table and did that smile again. The one that said he already knew how this ended. Before we begin, his lawyer said, I want to note for the record that we have a dissolution agreement ready for signature, and it would be in everyone's interest. I'd like to table that, I said. I have a matter to raise under Agenda Item 3. Equity restructuring. His lawyer glanced at my husband. You're a minority stakeholder, you don't have standing to. Actually, Dex slid a document to the center of the table. As of last quarter, Clearwater Advisory Group holds a 12% stake in Hargrove Family Holdings, which controls 3 of this company's 6 board seats. Clearwater's managing partner has granted proxy authority for today's meeting to... She didn't look up. My client. The room went quiet. His mother was the first one to speak, and what she said was very quiet and very precise. What is Clearwater? I looked at her. I let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to. It's mine, I said. He started to talk. I could hear his voice, somewhere off to my left, something about fraud, about deception, about how I had no right. But his own lawyer put a hand on his arm, and that gesture, more than anything, told me the lawyer already understood what this meant. His mother sat very still. She had the face of someone doing rapid math and not liking the answers. The independent board members were reading the documents Dex had distributed. One of them, a quiet man named Alcott, who had always been fair in every meeting I'd attended, looked up from the pages and said simply, "These appear to be in order." "They are in order," Dex said. "My client now holds, between her co-founder equity and her Clearwater proxy, effective voting control of this board." My husband stood up. The chair scraped back too fast. "You think you're so clever," he said. And there was something raw in his voice now, something that sounded less like anger and more like genuine disbelief. "You've been planning this, all of this, while you were drafting an agreement to take the company I built for $40,000, I said. I did not raise my voice. "Yes, I've been planning." His mother looked at me then. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time since I joined this family. And I saw something shift in her face. Not remorse. I was not naive enough to expect remorse. But recognition. She was seeing me, possibly for the first time, as someone who had known exactly where she was standing this entire time. "You could have just walked away," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was almost curious. "I built that company," I said. "I'm not walking away from what I built." The board voted. It took 11 minutes. My husband and his family's holding company were not removed. I did not have the standing to remove them, and that was never the goal. The goal was narrower and more precise. The dissolution agreement was rejected. My equity position was confirmed as co-founder equity, not minority shareholder equity. The company's IP documentation, including the original development logs, the client acquisition records, all of it was entered into the corporate record with my name attached. His lawyer requested a recess. We took 15 minutes. When we came back, they had a new number. It was not $40,000. I won't say the exact figure. I will say it was enough to fund the next phase of what I actually wanted to do, which was not Holloway Tech anymore. I had built that company, and it was real, and it mattered, and I was also done with it. Some things you fight for because they're yours, and then you let them go because you're ready for something bigger. I signed the new agreement in that same conference room on the 42nd floor. Outside the windows, the city was doing what it always does, moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people in rooms making decisions that would change everything. My husband did not speak to me before he left. His lawyer shook my hand, which I found almost funny. His mother walked past me in the hallway without stopping, But at the door she paused with her hand on the frame, her back still to me, and she said, "You should have told us who you were." "I did," I said. "You just weren't listening." I don't think about that day as often as you might expect. What I think about more is the Tuesday afternoon in the hospital parking garage, eating the sandwich, exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix, with this one stubborn, inconvenient idea that I couldn't make myself put down. I think about my mother at the kitchen table with the reading glasses and the magnifying glass, trying to understand documents that should have been clearer. The software we built, the software I built, is in over 200 small practices now. That number keeps growing. I think about all the nights I stayed up solving problems he didn't understand, all the Saturdays I drove to towns nobody else was visiting, all the versions and revisions and failures and pivots and 11:47 p.m. moments when I almost quit and didn't. You do not get to erase that. You do not get to call it helping out. I'm not telling this story to make you angry, though I understand if you are. I'm telling it because for a long time I thought what I felt in that hospital parking garage, that particular kind of tired, that particular kind of stubborn, was a weakness. Like I was too attached, too unwilling to be practical, too unable to let things go. It wasn't a weakness, it was the whole thing, it was everything. Whatever they've told you about what you built, whatever room they've put you in, and whatever agreement they've slid across the table, read the fine print. All of it. Know your position, know your leverage, and if they've never taken the time to know who you really are, let them find out in the room where it counts. I picked up my pen, and this time I signed what I wanted to sign. I still think about the sandwich, the cold parking garage, the fluorescent flicker overhead, the way I sat in my car eating alone because I'd forgotten that human beings need to eat. And somehow, in the middle of all that exhaustion, I couldn't let the idea go. That stubbornness used to embarrass me. I thought it meant I was bad at knowing when to quit. I know better now. What happened in that boardroom wasn't luck, and it wasn't some sudden reversal of fortune. It was the result of choices made quietly, consistently, over years. Choices nobody saw and nobody applauded. Every late night I spent in that studio apartment working while he was asleep. Every client I drove hours to reach on a Saturday. Every version of the software I rebuilt after it failed. The outcome on that 42nd floor was already being written in all those invisible moments. That's how it actually works, not in dramatic reversals. In accumulation. My husband believed he had won because he had the family name, the network, the louder voice in every room. What he didn't understand, what his mother didn't understand either, is that none of those things are a substitute for actually doing the work. He confused proximity to the company with ownership of it. He confused my silence with weakness. People who don't do the work themselves often make that mistake. They see someone quiet and patient and building, and they think, easy target. They don't realize that patience, when it's backed by real knowledge and real preparation, is not passivity. It's a different kind of power entirely. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. I was not always clear-headed through this. There were nights after I found those messages when I wanted to do something destructive and immediate, say something unforgivable, burn something down, make sure he felt it. That impulse is human and I'm not ashamed of it. But I also knew that acting from that place would cost me everything I'd actually built. So I sat with it. I let myself be angry in private, and then I went back to the lists. That discipline, choosing the response that serves your actual future rather than your immediate pain. That's not something that comes naturally. It's something you practice until it becomes how you move through the world. Dex asked me once midway through the process whether I was sure. Not about the strategy, about the whole thing. Whether it was worth it. I told her yes, and she tapped her pen twice and didn't push further. But I've thought about that question a lot since then. What made it worth it wasn't the number on the final agreement. It was the confirmation of something I needed to know about myself, that I could face something genuinely unfair, something that could have broken me, and I could think clearly anyway. I could act with integrity even when the other side wasn't. I could build something real and then fight for it through legitimate means, without becoming someone I didn't recognize. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. If they're sitting somewhere right now in their own version of a parking garage, Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, holding on to something they can't explain. Do the work. Read the fine print. Know what you've actually built and be able to prove it. And when the room tries to tell you that you were only ever a footnote in someone else's story, understand that the room is wrong, and then show them why. I picked up my pen, and this time I signed what I wanted to sign.